Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, everybody. Peru's Private Investment Promotion Agency starts now a presentation on the new opportunities for investment through private co-finance private initiatives, the Lima-Ica train and the third group of airports. This morning we will have with us the Minister of Transportation and Communications, the Executive Director of ProInversion, and the Project Portfolio Head, Mr. Gustavo Ibarbe, the General Director for Transportation Concessions from the Ministry of Transport and Communications, Mr. Jose Bardi, and ProInversion's Project Head, Mr. Luis Del Carpio. Next, we will share with you a video clip on investment opportunities that have brought us together this morning.
El Ministerio de Transportes y Comunicaciones estableció este año el periodo de presentación de iniciativas privadas cofinanciadas IPC, que permitirán la ejecución del ferrocarril Lima-Ica y el tercer grupo de aeropuertos regionales. El ferrocarril Lima-Ica consiste en el diseño, financiamiento, construcción, provisión de material rodante, operación y mantenimiento de un tren de pasajeros y carga de 323 kilómetros que se integrará a la red del Metro de Lima, plataformas logísticas y terminales portuarios. El tercer grupo de aeropuertos consiste en la operación, mantenimiento y la modernización de las instalaciones de 8 aeropuertos regionales ubicados en Jauja, Huánuco, Jaén, Hilo, Nuevo Chimbote, Rioja, Tingo María y Yurimaguas. Ambos proyectos se ejecutarán bajo el mecanismo de asociación público-privada, APP, en la modalidad de iniciativas privadas cofinanciadas con una inversión de más de 3.800 millones de dólares. De acuerdo con los plazos establecidos en el Decreto Supremo 021-2018 MTC, publicado en el Diario Oficial El Peruano, los proponentes deberán presentar sus propuestas ante ProInversion desde el 1 de abril hasta el 15 de mayo de 2019. Para la admisión a trámite, ProInversion evaluará la capacidad técnica y financiera del proponente de acuerdo a los lineamientos publicados en su portal institucional, los requisitos mínimos establecidos en el reglamento del Decreto Legislativo 1362. El conjunto de IPC admitidas a trámite serán enviadas al MTC para la emisión de su opinión de relevancia. Las propuestas de IPC seleccionadas con opinión favorable de relevancia continuarán el proceso de evaluación en ProInversion, que conducirá a las declaratorias de interés, apertura al mercado y posterior adjudicación de los proyectos de ser el caso. ProInversion y Ministerio de Transportes y Comunicaciones trabajando juntos para conectar a más peruanos. El Perú primero.
Next, we will hear the opening remarks by Mr. Alberto Ñeco, ProInversion Executive Director. Thanks for those words. It is really welcome, everybody. It is really very important for me to share with you the private investment opportunities, the unsolicited co-finance initiatives for the Ica Lima train and the third group of airports. These are two major projects that contribute to narrow the infrastructure investment gap in Peru. For ProInversion, this represents a big challenge to create projects that will provide the services that the population needs and thus contribute to the country's development. We want to thank the Minister and Vice Minister for Transport and Communications for trusting us with carrying forward these large projects. 2018, 2019 have been very important for the growth of the transportation sector in Peru. Last year, after several years, we finally awarded the Salaverry Port, a major project that is already bearing fruit. after the initial works that contributed to improve the port's operations, and we'll conclude in setting up a multi-purpose project also this year. We will also contribute to the Chimbote Container Terminal and the Marikana Port, and also the long-dated project of major relevance for this sector in our region, and that is the Huancayo-Huancavelica train. This is a project that fills a huge need of the two cities that require continued and safe and reliable communication, and will thus contribute to their further development. These two co-finance private initiatives contribute to other efforts that we have engaged in the last years. In particular, in the last 6 to 9 months, we have worked on preparing a portfolio of projects that the country urgently needs. This is not just works for just another project, but rather to be able to deliver the projects under the most appropriate arrangement, whether a PPP or a co-finance private investment. If this is a public works project that requires a public component, we will be most interested in adapting that route, since this would be the best way to build the projects that our people need. We have a number of strategic objectives. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but I would like to say to you that we have several strategic pillars. The first one has to do with our efficiency. Last year we restructured our agency, and we are now working together with international consultants that have contributed their great experience, and we expect that this for this new group of initiatives, we will also be working together with these international consultants. Another important new element is the fact that now investors will be able to get a coherent vision, a consistent vision that is the result of different visions of within the Peruvian government in its relations with private investors. This will increase the predictability of all our transactions, so that it can assess these projects and better understand the government's approach for the various types of contracts and the contract clauses. We have also put a lot of effort in decentralization and environmental issues. In the last few weeks, I have already met with 7 or 8 of the new region's governors, and I will continue these meetings as well as with provincial and district mayors, because we want to provide our technical support so the subnational governments can also build their own capacities for preparing projects, and that will be sustainable over time. The social and environmental component is also very important. None of these projects will become true if we cannot successfully tell the stakeholders and the people what are the project's characteristics, what are the advantages and the conditions for those contracts, so that investors can assess the overall impact on the involved communities. Any gaps can become a major obstacle in future. We have to work hand in hand with the communities and the people so that they understand what is the scope of the projects, what are the benefits and advantages that they may derive from it, and perhaps clear the environment about these PPPs that have come up in recent years, so that everybody will understand that this can be a very important element in developing their communities. And the last pillar is our communication, transparent communication with investors. That's why you're here this morning, so that we can deliver the right information so that you can carry out your assessment of the proposed projects. And our new, more efficient organization will help in all these efforts. If we have a number of projects in our future portfolio. We are working on the wastewater treatment plant for the Titicaca Lake. We are working already on our schedule, and we expect that we will deliver this project to the Office of the Controller as scheduled. And this is also the result of working hand in hand with the Controller's Office so that they can meet our deadlines for delivering their opinion, so that by March 27th we will be able to reach a long-dated goal and aspiration of the population from Puno, so that we stop, at least partially, contamination of the Lake Titicaca waters. Also this year we will, as I just mentioned, award the Huancayo, Huancavelica, and train project. So we expect that we will be able to materialize investments worth about $10 billion, of which 3,800 million will be awarded this year as expected and scheduled. Supreme Decree 021 published in the El Peruano Gazette requests that proposals of these type of a contract must deliver their proposals through March 31st this year. Thanks very much for your time and attention. On behalf of ProInversion and the people of Peru. Before we start with the presentations, we would like to invite remind the attendees of this presentation that they have been delivered a questionnaire to gather your opinion in this event. Also, please share with us your contact information. The corresponding information slips are available and the desk outside the hall. We will now invite the Minister of Transport and Communication to share with us his remarks on the CPI projects. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I want to take the opportunity to welcome you to this meeting, to this reunion on behalf of the executive branch. But unfortunately, one of the reasons that our minister has not been able to say this welcome words is that we are working on competitive issues precisely this morning, together with the Council of Ministers, together with President Vizcarra. And that is why I have the honor of addressing you to share with you the technical aspects of the projects that we expect to carry out, and that will certainly be complemented by other projects within our sector. When talking about competitiveness, we have to talk about connectivity, and precisely connectivity is one of the main issues that we face as a sector ministry, and we are working not just alone. The Ministry of Transport and Communications, we have launched some calls for bids last year that will help us bring development development to our communities. And in that understanding, we require your participation of the private sector so that together we can build some of these projects that perhaps might pose some financial difficulties for the state, and also because of the need to move quickly, and that is why we need you, the private sector, to become involved. So while simultaneously we continue to introduce regulatory changes that will allow us to face these projects that from the concept to a final conclusion would until now typically 6, 7, 8 years. We are now working so that we can deliver these projects more quickly to fulfill the people's expectations. These terms cannot be so long because they often exceed the terms of office of national and local authorities, which results in these projects eventually sitting in the desk drawer for a year and never getting completed. That's why we need this build synergies with you so that we can bring these projects to a happy ending. We want in this sense share with you 2 specific projects for which we expect you will contribute the most appropriate technical solutions, and so that we can bring them materialize them. And these concern in the first place a transportation project for goods and passengers from Ica all the way to the Callao port, and the other one is the new types of transportation that we want to build through the maritime transport. We have also contributed to materialize some projects that have been waiting very long, and that we want to also mention of the very recent news about the new Chancay Port project. These are ways in which, by supporting these private initiatives, we want to contribute to meet the growing demand from foreign trade that's growing in Peru, not just by encouraging faster procedures and better regulations, but also by contributing to the building of these infrastructure projects. Without further ado, I want to share with you the technical aspects of these 2 projects, and let's start with the Lima-Ica train that would link Ica to Callao port. This is something that is already mentioned by Alberto in his introductory remarks. The Lima-Ica train will move freight from Ica to Lima. Will have 2 destinations. One is the Lima market and also the international markets through our experts. It is true that we already have the Pisco port, but there are certain types of freight that will not be cannot be served from the Pisco port. This is a project that's about 323 kilometers, and the preliminary design that would cost about $3.2 billion. That's about the same figure that for the train's length, and we want to propose a 30-year concession, a franchise. We have already gotten the approval of the Treasury for financing, so that the appropriate funding will be available for this project. This train This railway will connect, will be a move passengers and freight and connect them to the local transport network in Lima and Callao, including the Lima Metro subway, but also and bus network in Lima, and through these stations with the future 2, 3, and 4 subway lines in Lima. There are here some estimates from a preliminary study on the length of tunnels and bridges that will need to be built, not only for this project, but also within the city, the urban area, so that we will not clash with the city's internal transport. The Lima transport in Lima is already quite chaotic and a lot of pressure. The demand has two components, both the passengers that are moved by independent private bus companies, and that cause great congestion on the South Pan American Highway. Their supply of transport is clearly insufficient at this point, and if transport needs grow as the Lima and South Lima populations continue to grow, they will require more transportation infrastructure. Demand therefore is guaranteed and short thanks to the large number of passengers that need to move to the end points of this railway, but also by the demand from the intermediate stops demand. These are the cities of Lima, Cañete, Pisco, and Ica, and other intermediate stops that will definitely be proposed as the corresponding studies move forward. The main components of the project include the length of the railway. This will also be a train that must have a freight capacity. So these are some of the characteristics that are required to move a freight, and also because the specific characteristics, the slope cannot be above 5.5 degrees, which will allow to reach speeds of about 200 kilometers per hour, and this should improve transportation performance. And given the high traffic in those areas, sometimes results in 4 or 5 hour train travel, and we expect that only 3 hours will be required to move from the beginning and end points with assured departure and arrival times for this kind of transport. And I mentioned earlier, we want to connect with all the basic transport grids networks in the city of Lima, and we want to complement the improve competitiveness. Together with the Ministry of Transport, we are working on logistic platforms and other initiatives that will eventually require using this mass transport system, so that we can improve the country's competitiveness, reduce transport costs that at present are over 30% of total cost, which is about twice as much as other countries. So we are seeking to reduce this share so that we can increase the productivity and reduce these extra costs that will result in better production and productivity of our agricultural exporters. The next project involves the third group of airports. This is a type of transport that has not received sufficient importance so far, that will allow for the fast transport of freight and passengers, in particular in some more backward parts of the country. And we have identified the third group of airports nationwide, and this would contribute to improve this kind of transport by building or improving 8 airports across country in Loreto, San Martin, Huánuco, Ancash, Junin, and Moquegua. These 8 airports in Cajamarca, Huánuco, and Tinga-Maria, Jauja, Rio, Chimbote, Yurimaguas, and Tinga-Maria. These airports are now already under use. This is a $600 million 30-year concession, $300 million 30-year concessions, basically aimed at meeting the needs on the land side by providing equipment for the airport and improving security, improving the airports that are presently insufficient for the kind of growing flows that are emerging. And on the air side, we expect to improve the landing strips and tarmac conditions. In Huánuco Airport, the Huánuco Airport is now used. Some airlines are traveling there, have started flying there recently to meet demand. We have started with smaller airplanes, but we want to improve conditions so that we can reduce transportation costs and make these airports available for larger commercial airplanes. In Huánuco, we at this point in time are introducing some improvements through the airport administration from the Ministry of Transport, but of course all these will have to be improved further by the winner of the award. And we need control tower, air navigation, gates, and other types of local equipment. Another recurring issue is the facilities for people arriving at the airport, including, for instance, things like parking lots. We will also have to require improved tarmacs and landing strips so that we have already started working on this, but we expect the concessionaire to keep these facilities under the best possible conditions. We are working already on a passenger terminal that will be about 560 meters long, and in Tinga-Maria Airport we also need equipment in the passenger area, luggage belts, improved tax collection, improve the security and control towers. These control towers were designed for an airdrome, but now we need to meet international ICAO standards. Also, we need to improve gates, parking lots, the landing strip. We will there need to build the appropriate tarmac facilities. This is an area that is also near a river, so we will need to build some riverside protections. At present, we have 1.1 kilometer runway, but and only a small airplanes, 40 to 50 passengers can land there, which we need to improve. The Hainan Airport was Hainan Airport's runway improvements already started during this administrations, but there are a number of improvements that need to be built. We need to build a aircraft parking area and appropriate gates. Also, the parking lot has to be expanded and improved. And as in the other cases, we have to improve security issues. The passenger terminal also needs to be improved. And we need a runway that will be able to serve the larger tourist flow because of the particular tourist attractions in this area, and also demand from other areas in the Amazon that will be flowing through this area. The government is already working on improving tourist infrastructure so that this can help these airports to work better in commercial air carriers that choose to serve this airport will also have the appropriate facilities, as well as the passengers that need to use the airport. In Ilo, the Ilo airport was improved recently, particularly in the air side. Tomorrow, commercial flights will start towards this destination, and we expect more airlines to start serving this airport with larger air carriers, 160 passenger planes. This airport has not been growing previously, but it already had a great potential. And thanks to the building of the coastal highway, will meet demand not just from the mining industry locally, but also surrounding areas or nearby areas, like, for instance, Arequipa, the coastal area of Arequipa, and Matarani and Mollendo, that are expected to increase their demand. And also, at present, from July to November, these airports are closed because of a thick cloud cover, and many of the flights that would be a destination to reach there have to be rerouted to Lima. So we expect that rather than having to land in rerouting the flights to Lima, they could be rerouted to the Ilo airport that's much closer to the larger Arequipa hub. In Chimbote, the Chimbote airport has not been used intensively because of some improvements that have not been built and that are required, but has a great potential if we're planning of agro-export growth in the Ancash department region. The improvements that are required are similar to the other ones. We need luggage conveyor belts, collection airport tax collection, airport fee collection systems, parking lots, gateways, a new passenger terminal. Because the airport presently has a very limited equipment, we do not have proper security measures. For instance, a fire hazard, and they need to build also a perimeter road to move the larger expected car traffic. The runway and the tarmac can only provide a limited capacities. We have a 1,900 square meter passenger terminal, but is not properly equipped. In Rioja, the Siemens Airport also required, like in other cases, improvements. The runway only takes medium-sized airplane. It's about 1,900 meters long. We have a sufficient surface area for improving and expanding the passenger terminal. Only smaller airplanes under 50 passengers are serving this airport at present. The improvements would allow to reach the intermediate altitude jungle agro-exports to be flown out of this region. The Yurimaguas Airport has been improved, upgraded in recent years, but further investments will allow to use it for multimodal transport through the Irsa North Highway. This further integration and development of agro-exports from this area will certainly improve the potential of the Yurimaguas Airport. We also have here an 1,800 meter long, a 30 meter wide runway. We have a limited number of passenger headers that are presently used basically for private aircraft flights, but the potential is there to meet intermediate level demand that will grow as the potential of the agro-exports from this area also increase. This is a listing of the minimal requirements for this airport. It's a summary of all for all the airports that we want to improve. And the subsequent slides provide a summary of what I've already shared with you. These are the things the projects that we expect proposals from you so that we can improve the railway project and the airports project. Thanks for your time and attention. Mr. Gustavo Ibarwin, ProInversion's project portfolio director, will share with us the requirements and procedures to be followed for submitting CPIs, co-financed private initiatives. Good morning, everybody. I would like to start by thanking your attendance, mass attendance to this event. Both Alberto and the Vice Minister have already mentioned many of the things that I had planned to share with you, so I'm going to focus on what would come afterwards from the publishing of the Supreme Decree, that is, so to speak, the birth certificate of these investment opportunities for all of you, and the final and the opinion of relevance that'll be provided by the Ministry of Transport and Communications, MTC. This slide, as both Alberto and the Vice Minister said, frames the opportunities for investment for these two type of large investment projects. The birth certificate, so to speak, was put on November 30th, 2018 when the 021 Supreme Decree was published that opens these opportunities to the market. The deadline for submitting the proposals for these projects runs from April 1st to May 15th this year, 2019. All this has already been published in a ProInversion web page. It is important for you to submit your proposals, can have access to all information. What is the relevant information for you to prepare your proposals? The guidelines, because they will provide the legal framework so you can prepare proposals that meet the intervention needs that have already been discussed by Vice Minister Estramadoira. These are some of the stages of the process to assess public-private partnerships through a co-financed private initiative. At the present, for these two projects that we're discussing are in the planning and scheduling programming stage. What we have already at hand now is the intervention characteristics in more detail than we had previously. This is the flowchart of the entire process that goes all the way to the relevance opinion. The entire process from the publication of the Supreme Decree, December 30th last year, until the opinion of relevance takes about 9 months. I'm going to explain more or less at what stage we're in right now. We have distributed this in 3 sub-processes for the planning stage. The first one has to do with the filing of the co-finance private initiatives before that are sent to the ProInversion reception desk, the Mesa department, starting on April 1st. As I said earlier, the birth certificate for this first stage is the publication of the Supreme Decree on the September 30th, 2018. On January 15, ProInversion published the needs and the guidelines. As I mentioned, all this is published in the ProInversion website. The next stage is for you to start preparing your proposals so that you can submit them starting April 1st through May 15th by filing them, sending them to the ProInversion reception desk, taking always into account the intervention needs and guidelines. Then we will move to the next sub-stage, that is acceptance for the evaluation of the CPIs. In other words, they will meet all the guidelines and the intervention needs that are published already and would meet the requirements that we have set for them. Then the proponents will send, should that be necessary, any corrections or changes after having issued our remarks on the proposals that were filed. Then we will move to the stage where we accept these proposals for processing. This will be communicated to the proponents, and we will then require the relevance opinion from the Ministry of Transport and Communication. The last sub-stage, or the last phase of this general planning stage, is precisely the relevance opinion. After ProInversion has requested the opinion of relevance from the Ministry of Transport, the MTC, the Ministry will assess these opinions of relevance for the private initiatives that have been filed and may require additional information should that be needed. The proponents will send additional information and introduce the necessary corrections within 20 days. And as the final step in the planning stage, MTC can issue a final relevance opinion and sign the agreements. Private initiatives may be submitted for the train project and the airport project, and the Ministry of Transport will provide its opinion of relevance for each of these projects. The assessment stages for these PPPs, and in particular case the CPIs, the co-finance private initiatives. After the relevance opinion is issued, we move to the next stage, that is the preparation stage, that will when we will prepare the assessment reports and evaluate the technical component and the financial economic component, we will move to the project structuring stage. The structuring stage, the transaction, and the contract execution stages. Although it's under ProInversion's responsibility, we are now as you have already realized, work hand in hand with the Ministry of Transport from an much earlier stage. We are working together with the MTC from the planning stage to determine what are the MTC interventions projects. And not just with the Ministry of Transport, these couple of projects, but with all other ministries and government agencies. After the structuring stage that ends with the declaration of interest on the CPI, the co-finance public private initiative, we move to the transaction stage, where when we open the projects to the market, we send the project to the market until the declaration and all the information that has been used for the prior stages is confidential. When the declaration of interest is issued, all the information is published, sent to the market, so that other potentially interested investors can make also their proposals. And then we move to the contract execution stage. What is the difference between, in what regards to regulatory frameworks, between a co-finance private initiative and a self-financed private project? As Alberto and the Vice Minister said last year, we awarded the salary report, and that is or was a self-financed, self-sustained private initiative, because it was this investment is paid from demand. The demand risk is transferred to the private sector or the concession holder. This is a typical project approach for Peruvian coastal ports. The co-finance private initiatives can be filed, in particular case for the regional and local governments, during the first calendar days each year, and for ministries, like for instance this one, through a supreme decree like the one that was published in December last year for the self-financed initiatives. Those can be filed at any time. For co-financed initiatives, the total project cost must exceed 10,000 tax units. For self-financed, there's no total investment amount, a fixed total investment amount, and then there's other issues that are included in the schedule for CPI submissions, and then goes through the declaration of interest and viability, and finally under stage 7, it is the publication of the declaration of interest that takes about 90 years. As I mentioned earlier, if there is expressions of interest from third parties, then we open an additional window, and if there is no expressions of interest, then the award is made directly to the proponent of the co-financed private initiatives. For the self-financed initiatives, the final process is very similar to the co-financed private initiatives. In the last legs of this process, this slide summarizes the entire CPI process, the opening of the CPI window. That's the purple shaded area. Starts with the publication of the Supreme Decree, then we move to the publication of the investment projects themselves, and then the acceptance for processing, and finally the Ministry of Transport issues its relevance opinion for the proposals. And then we move to the formulation stage for the pre-investment projects in the Inverti.pe framework. Then the project's viability is issued. We prepare, we assess them, the project, and then we move on to the private investment promotion stage. After that, we structure the project's financial component. We are now working, as Alberto just said, are creating centers of excellence, or the pillars. We're building ProInversion as a center of excellence. We have already awarded the contract to prepare the standardized clauses for the concession contracts, and we're working on the financial guidelines that'll provide internally and externally our own team, as well as the potential proponents, enough or sufficient tools for a better predictability, financial predictability of our projects. As I mentioned in the prior slides, then we published the declaration, and we launched the proposal to the market for 90 days. If there are other declarations of interest, we will extend that the proposal. If there is no additional proposals, the project will be awarded directly to the original proponent. This slide summarizes also what the Vice Minister shared with us in his presentation on the proposal evaluation criteria. Require that the project meets certain parameters. All this is included in the guidelines and in the intervention needs that have already been published. This is in ProInversion website. There are 5 evaluation assessment parameters. One is the level for co-finance for the investments, and next the co-finance for maintenance operation, M&O, and these to create a competitiveness factor for the submitted projects. Then we assess the area of intervention that should be limited to the scope that appears in the Supreme Decree published last year. Then the improvement of the transportation service to contribute to narrow existing gaps, and finally the optimum use of risk sharing in a PPP arrangement, because the final objective of these PPPs or the PPP structuring process is to transfer risk so that the risk will not be fully taken by the government or the state, but also some risks should be transferred to the private operator, with some of these risks obviously being accepted by the state. This slide summarizes the estimated investment for the Lima-Ica train. That's about 10.5 billion sols Peruvian currency, and for the airport, 1.9, almost 2 billion sols. These are the estimated investment amounts. This will create a maximum annual capacity that would result in annuities over 15 years for the Inca Lima train. The expected annual annuity is 1.3 billion sols, and for the airport, 250 million sols. These are annual returns over 15 years. Here we show the investment needs for the Ica Lima-Ica railway. The rolling stock supply that must be last generation and must provide freight and passenger transport. This railroad must be connected to the Lima-Callao underway, including port terminals, logistic platforms, and in the case of the connection with Callao, with the Paracas terminal, this is approximately 333 kilometer long railways, 44 kilometers of tunnels, 50 kilometers of tunnels, over flights, and 229 surface railroad. These details will be defined in the pre-investment study. These are the intervention needs. This is a summary table of the investment needs for the third batch of regional efforts, comprised of the 8 regional efforts that our Vice Minister discussed. This is an evaluation of the technical and financial capacities of the proponent. The technical capacity is measured by similar experience of three similar projects, both for the third group of airports as for the Ica Lima train. The proponents will submit to ProInversion a simple copy of their certificates issued by the involved entities that hired their services. The technical capacities can be credited by their own experience, or in case of consortia, from the experience of one or more of their components, and also through the experience of one of their related companies in case of holding companies. As regards the financial capacity, we have a number of minimum assessment requirements that we expect at ProInversion. We need to assess, evaluate the last 2 financial statements, audited financial statements, and from the most recent available fiscal year. Financial capacities can be certified or accredited by the financial capacity of one or more of the consortium's members, and also we will take into account the order of arrival of the CPIs at the ProInversion reception desk. These are the minimum requirements, regulatory requirements as per Legislative Decree 1362, which is the provides the overall framework for the PPPs. This is also included in the information that's already available in the ProInversion website. This is the reference model for estimating the total cost of investment, or the project's total cost. As regards the third group of airports, in particular the approximate number of beneficiaries exceed 7 million for the 8 airports. This is important because at ProInversion we do not only evaluate the financial and technical sides, but also the social impact of these projects. Benefits. The CPI will be awarded for 30 years. In case of the Lima-Ica railway, the beneficiaries in the project's area exceed 10 million, and that's why this infrastructure is so important, because it will certainly contribute to narrow significantly the country's transport infrastructure gap. The estimated investment amount exceeds $3 billion on a 30-year franchise. This is basically what I'll share with you, and we'll be perfectly happy to entertain any questions or clarifications on your side. Thanks very much. We will now open the floor to your questions. As I said earlier, there's question slips. We're now going to ask Mr. Solardi, the General Concessions Head at MTC, Mr. Del Carpio from ProInversion, and Mr. Ibarwin for the portfolio from ProInversion's project portfolio, and they will be available to answer your questions or provide any clarifications on your side. The presentations and all other information that we have shared with you are available at www.proinversion.gov.pe. ProInversion Transport, that's our landing page that provides all the where we have published all the slides and presentations and the videos that we've already shared with you. We're now going to turn over to our members of the panel to address your concerns, answer your questions. Good morning. I am Luis Del Carpio, and I'm here as Deputy Director of Project Services. the deputy department in my charge will be in charge of processing your proposals. And also during this preparation stage, we will be available to address any specific queries, and of which there will be certainly many. And finally, we will send your proposals to the project portfolio executive director and eventually to the Ministry of Transport. So this will not be the first or last opportunity for us to engage with you. We will always be available to your questions. One recurring question has to do with the available information for preparing the CPIs. All the information that's available, that's needed for the CPIs, has already been published in our page website. There is a lot of secondary and ancillary information that may also be of interest to many of you. Much of this information is public information that is typically published in the MTC's website. So if you have any specific questions or additional information requests, we will be always be willing to provide that kind of access to public information that's already available. There's a question about the airports. These are only two projects that we're talking here about: the Lima-Ica train and the airport, the third group of airports. So the proposals for the group efforts must cover all 8 airports. It is not possible to make individual airport proposals. This question addresses the estimated deadlines through the declaration notice. There is 2 types of deadlines. We have the deadlines that are governed by law. These are fixed, and the portfolio had started running on the announcement at the end of December of the public regulation, whereby the government or the state decides to promote these 2 projects. This time it has specifically advised on what projects it's interested in promoting, and the first deadline starts running on April 1st through May 15th to submit your documents at the ProInversion reception desk. Those documents will be sent to the deputy department of the ProInversion team, where the ProInversion team will ensure that these proposals meet the basic requirements, both financial and technical. The time to prepare any kind of objections is very short. So is the period that you will have available to remove those objections after the executive director's decision. Those documents will be sent to the Ministry of Transport and Communications. For instance, for the Lima-Ica train, we will be sending 2, 3, or 5 projects that will be accepted for processing. This is something that we will determine during this process, so that the Ministry of Transport, within a maximum period, a deadline of 90 days, that's the legal deadline, will send back to us ProInversion and the proposals, which are the projects that they will be issuing their relevance opinion on. Then we will start with the estimated deadlines for the formulation stage. Before we had a regulated deadlines, now we have estimated deadlines. These are deadlines that typically take a government, or used to take a government years to prepare these pre-investment projects in the new inverted.pe framework, which is a lot more efficient. We expect that with the support of industry, that is interests that are perfectly well aligned with the government's interests, in other words, to run these projects as quickly as possible, the project formulation stage will take between 9 and 10 months compared to 6 years previously. And this concludes with the viability declaration, and then we will move on to the structuring stage, and that could be summarized as the project drafting stage that aligns the private and state risks. This contract is prepared by ProInversion with the support of a consultant that meets the required standards, and they will have to comply with the guidelines provided by the involved government agencies like Treasury and the Ministry, and that will conclude with a declaration of interest that will open this project to the market. This structuring stage should take between 8 and 10 months. There is a very big effort by ProInversion's and the ministry's leadership to run a shorter deadlines. Altogether, we have already added up like a couple of years. Then there is a 90-day window for third parties to declare their eventual interest, or eventually the direct award if there is no third parties that are interested in this project. And in that case, obviously, the original proponent will cross their fingers so that there are no other interested third parties, and they will be given a direct award. This sounds like a very long period, but I think they are quite realistic and definitely feasible. Good morning, and to address some of the questions that have been forwarded to me, these basically have to do with issues to get further information about the Lima-Ica train. The ProInversion webpage has already published basically what we expect from the proposals and the criteria for the interventions, like the land issue that is critical for these PPPs. But of course, that basically depends on the route that is proposed for developing the project, based also concerning the prior studies. The ministry basically expects the private sector to prepare their own proposals. The in-depth studies will be made during the corresponding formulation stage, and that's why we have already published the broad parameters that will allow us to identify what are the proposals that are best aligned with the ministry's objectives. But of course, we will be available through our concessions department to answer or address any of your concerns, as well as the railways department in regards of the Marcona and Chinchara's projects. Those are very different projects. The Marcona project is a self-financed private initiative, and in Chinchara, that is a franchise that is no longer there. The government is now restructuring that proposal as a regional government works for Texas initiative. I have some questions concerning the risk distribution allocation. For instance, how land expropriations will be managed. Also questions about project risk will be distributed for this large-scale kind of projects. This is a logical question. By law, the government, the state, has the power to do these kind of projections, but we expect, obviously, with the full support of the awardee through a mandate that'll be issued, passed on to the franchisee to contribute to these tasks. This is something that will definitely have to be discussed during the formulation and structuring stages. How long does it take a ProInversion from the CPI to the declaration? I mentioned earlier, these are terms fixed by law, about 90 business days, a little bit longer if we add the presentation, the submission stage, and then the 9 to 17 months, so on average about 2 years. Of course, we expect to make them shorter significantly. There are some stages that are fixed, like for instance May 15th, that we have to wait for. Somebody says that May 15th seems rather short for project submissions. Unfortunately, this deadline has been already regulated. We cannot extend it, so we will have to meet the deadline that will start running April 1st. I'm also asked if the incurred expenses will be reimbursed, and to what extent. Yes, there is a regulation according to which if the proponent is not awarded a project because a third party files a proposal and the original proponent loses the bid, the reimbursement will be made. And if also there is a maximum amount for that, yes, there is. That is regulated. We feel it's quite significant. It's about 2% of the investment amount. However, that investment amount must be brought to a net present value. Of course, that figure is a little bit lower than the estimated amounts, but this is a considerable amount. However, for reimbursement of the expenses incurred in preparing the project. There's some more questions about the train. One concerns whether the route has already been designed. It has not been. We expect the private sector, through their innovation and experience skills, will propose the best possible railway. Also, there are some questions about the very short deadlines that has already been addressed. There's also questions about the technological requirements. We expect the operators and franchisees' experience will help contribute to our evaluation and administration. This is why we are opening this window, and there's more questions about whether there is more information available from the MTC. I already said that there is. We are perfectly open to accept any request for additional additional information, technical information, I would like to discuss with what Del Carpio and Solordi has already said, because I think this is it's a question that many of the attendees have about investors and financial sector experts. As I said, we have already hired a consultancy that will increase predictability by introducing standardized clauses in a concession, clauses that will make it more predictable. The success of a PPP is that it'll successfully and efficiently transfer risks to the private sector, and also of the risks that the state is willing to accept. We're working together with the Ministry so that this will be so we are working on contracts that include deadlines and schedules for making land available with predictable fixed dates, as though that can assign risks to the private sector, taking into account that the state will meet with a timely delivery of these of the land and the removal of any kind of interferences. Many of the risks that are very complex, difficult to assess, but are included in our concession contracts. The contract that will be soon awarded for the Titicaca Lake wastewater treatment plant also includes this kind of commitments, obligations on the part of the state that will enhance the market and private investor predictability, contract predictability as to when the projects will, the project work will start and when the projects will start operating. This is something that previously led to some complex issues. However, this kinds of risks or this kind of availability or risk evaluation is definitely something that has to be taken into account in Peru. Land title clearing has been a big issue, not only in Peru, but in Latin America and around the world. Contrary to these PPP infrastructures, development has to do with the way we manage them, and we expect that together with the Ministry of Transport, we are bent on increasing predictability so that the franchise holder will have available all the infrastructure and the land that is required to build the project. We also have some suggestions about concerning these proponent risks on the proponent side. The proposed proponents will have to compete with anybody who shows interest in the 90-day window, and also with so the question is, would there be any additional bonification bonus that to incentivize the proponents? These suggestions are not included in the legal framework and therefore not something that we can include in the formulation or structuring stages. The incentive for the proponents will be to file a project that is of their interest and compete, and they may come up with a proposal that is that ties up with another proposal. There is the opportunity of recovering the getting reimbursed for the expenses if not award the contracts, but our obligation is basically to open these projects, launch these projects to the market, and find the create a proper competition positions. What the co-finance starts for the Lima-Ica train in 2026, and that's because the co-finance has been transferred, also pushed down the road. Also for the airports, MTC tells investors this is as much as I can pay and when I could start paying. And this is important information for the structuring. When you determine the return on investments, you have to take into account this effect. You cannot expect payment reimbursements payments starting in 2025 because the MTC would not have the financial capacity to start paying earlier. There's some concern about the contents of the initial proposal that has to be filed with the May 15th deadline. And here we have to make a clear distinction between a PPP and a CPI. When you come with a PPP, have 100% finished, completed proposals, and we evaluate that project, and we declared, if we are interested, we declare that it's of our interest, and if there is something that's missing, we ask you to introduce any changes, and that can take a long time. But in this case, formally, the state recognizes that all this has to do through some pre-investment stages, pre-formulation, pre-investment stages. So we were asking industry to file your proposals that we can evaluate it in the framework of the regulations, so that once they've accepted the processing and their requirements have been met, and the MTC has to choose between several options as per certain parameters, we will meet with the proponent that has met the legal and technical requirements, so that we can get into the technical market and other details. We will establish verification milestones. Definitely, you will have to carry the greater load of this work because you will be interested in providing all the details for the projects together with us in preparing this project through the viability declaration stage. Given the interest of the ministry, we expect that all these deadlines will be met. So the May 15th deadline should be enough. So basically, to address the question concerning what would be the overall contents of the proposal that has to be filed by May 15th, how can a CPI can be prepared in just 3 months? This is a proposal that will be submitted to pre-investment projects. We recognize this is a co-finance project, and we are setting forth the limits of the co-financing that we can provide. What protection mechanisms will be put in place to rule out proposals that are not sound enough and that will eventually require modifying the original contracts? Our agency has introduced already some measures to prevent these kinds of proposals. We have raised the hurdles, and the legal framework has already limited the number of addenda that can be made to the contract, and this forces you and us that the legal framework requires that we make a greater effort during the structuring stage. Also, in what requires the requirements for competition, they do not depend only on the lowest request for co-financing, co-funding, but also there are a number of factors and elements that are being put in place, and also there is this effort to avoid these temporary proposals that include a number of requirements that have already been introduced in these requests for proposals. There's a question here about the technical components of the Ica Lima train. there are many issues that have already been made. Typically, what comes first to our minds is who will be requiring the lowest co-financing, and we will eventually introduce retributions, remunerations for operations, maintenance, etc. But the details will be determined over coming months. There's a suggestion here. There's a question here whether all the queries and answers will be published in the webpage. We will include them. We will list all these, include all these questions and answers for easier consultation, as well as some of the questions that may not eventually that we will not eventually have enough time to address right now. So basically, these are the questions that I have been sent. Thanks very much for your interest. And let me say once again that our Deputy Project Department is open to your questions. We have a email address, SSP email address for you to send your questions and concerns. Please fill the questionnaire so we can have your remarks about this event, and also check our landing page where we will publish all our presentations and slides. And now I'll turn it to Mr. Jose Saldarriaga from the Minister of Transport for his closing remarks. I want to start by thanking ProInversion for organizing this meeting and for your time and attention, because that demonstrates your interest since our new administration took over May last year. We started by reviewing the project portfolio, and with the existing funding available, budgets available, we could not have filled all the priority needs, and examining the future prospects for the country, we prepared this project portfolio that would help us to close the existing infrastructure gap. We're working together with the Ministry of Housing and Construction and Sanitation, and we particularly put a lot of trust in the co-financed private initiatives. I think that previously, these CPIs did not have the expected results and created a lot of uncertainty among industry, but now we are introducing the necessary regulatory and internal structuring reorganization. We're working together with ProInversion, and that is why we have launched these projects in that framework, and we expect in the coming months we will open a new investment opportunities window for more highways and transport issues. Some of the projects that we have launched previously have created significant interest, and we expect to award the corresponding projects soon in coming months, and to add further momentum to this mechanism that can significantly contribute to building national infrastructure. Like, for instance, in the case of the airports, we had a partial project, and like we did in a group 2 that required a subsequent stage for improving standards. We, in this new group of efforts, wanted to establish the optimum standard for requirements for this operations, and that's why we have that has resulted in a larger amount of investment, making these projects more attractive, and that's what we expect from the private sector, both for the train, the Ica Limit train, and the airports. We do not have all the answers to all the technical questions, basically because we expect that you will come up with your own proposals. We want to engage in a very clear process, and in coming weeks we will publish the parameters and criteria we will be using for evaluating which will be the final proposal we will take, and that will move to the formulation stage. There's not much science there. What our agency is interested in getting the lowest capex and opex, because that'll require the lowest budget funding, and that'll provide additional funding to create the building of the new infrastructure the country needs. Those are the basic criteria that we will be putting forward to you so that you can prepare your proposals, and when the ministry starts its evaluation, we will do so with the greatest transparency and clarity. In addition to that, of course, the ministry repairs remains open so that we can make this an optimal process. We have not have a concessions department, but rather a projects department that will focus on these PPPs and CPIs. That will be govern project formulation in a much faster way than previously. CPIs previously died during these formulation stages that seemed endless. We expect that the deadlines will be fixed and provide the perfect predictability that'll leave both sides happy, make both sides happy. We cannot extend these processes endlessly, because we have a very well-defined expectations that have to be met in the medium term. Thanks very much for your time and attention. And now, Mr. Alberto Nieco, will you please join us on the stage for the official photo? And let's thank the members of the panel with a round of applause. Mr. Salardi from MTC, Mr. Del Carpio from ProInversion, and Mr. Ibarwin from ProInversion as well. And to all of you, thanks very much for your time and attendance. And the video and presentations have already been published in our ProInversion website. Thank you very much. If you have not provided us with your contact details, please do so at the front desk just outside this room. Thanks very much.